Hello and welcome to another TLDR global video. So I had a thought the other day. How much money actually is there in the world? Now this isn't a fantasy of becoming the next Jeff Bezos and capturing all of the world's money via some moderately successful YouTube channels. No, I was wondering that with so much economic difficulty, so much poverty around the world, how much money is actually out there? So in this video we attempt to answer that exact question. Before we do, and to help with my monetary takeover, please consider subscribing to the channel. The majority of you haven't made the jump yet, so consider subscribing to help us out and ensure that you get all of our videos going forward, on silly topics like this one and more serious stuff regarding ongoing wars, elections and global leaders. Thank you so much for your support. You might look at the runtime of this video and be wondering how we could have possibly padded it out for so long. I mean, just count the money and give us an answer already. Well, firstly, I'm a professional YouTuber, so if there's one thing I'm good at, it's making videos long enough to fit in extra ad breaks. But secondly, and seriously, it turns out that it's not as simple as you might think, and the answer depends on what you think money is. That's because there's 5 different ways of measuring money, so-called money aggregates. These money aggregates have varying liquidities, which in plain speak refers to how easily and quickly you could convert something to cold hard cash. Hurdles such as paperwork and restrictions imposed by banks all reduce liquidity. A house, for instance, is a prime example of a relatively illiquid asset. It takes a bit of time to put on the market, sign the contracts and receive the money, so it's not instant cash on hand. The first money aggregate, known as M0, is what we just explained as the simplest form: physical cash, nothing else. This is the narrowest, most literal definition of money. In fact, it's so narrow that there's very little in the way of statistics or data on this available publicly, in part due to the fact that more and more of us aren't using physical cash for purchases, with an ever-growing proportion of money being stored in bank accounts. In turn, most of those working in finance and central banks have little use for such a narrow definition of money. Regardless, if we go with this most narrow measure, then the total amount of money in the world is 6.6 trillion US dollars. This is such a big number that it's probably best to put in some perspective. If we converted all of that money into $100 bills, then that would weigh 66 million kilograms, roughly equivalent to 9 Eiffel Towers or 5,323 London double-decker buses. Perhaps an even easier way to visualize this is that if we laid all of the banknotes next to each other, this line would be 10.3 million kilometers long, or long enough to get to the moon and back 13 times, or alternatively, long enough to go around the world 257 times. The most important thing to remember here is that these calculations are based on the money being converted into $100 bills, the largest denomination. If they were $1 bills placed next to each other, you could get most of the way to Saturn. Perhaps though you're a proponent of a socialist utopia and favour redistributing not just some of the wealth, but all of the wealth. And maybe you want to know what would happen if you divided all of this money equally. Well, comrade, that would come to $860 each. In summary, that's a ton of money. But what's more interesting than the visualization of a ton of money? The visualization of even more money. So let's take a look at the M1 measure. This includes physical cash, but broadens the scope slightly to include bank accounts and the likes of instant savings accounts. M1 can be seen as the total value of money if everyone went to the bank and withdrew everything they could on the spot. So the £100 you have in your current account and 48 pence you have in your fixed savings account would be included. But that account where you have to give 3 months notice to withdraw, yeah, that one wouldn't. The total amount of money included in M1 is a little bit more than M0, about $28.6 trillion more. Or, as classic TLDR critics would allege, about the same amount that we've received in funding from George Soros. Using the same comparisons as before, let's do some visualizations. If we converted this into $100 bills, it would weigh 352 million kilograms. This is roughly the same as 48 Eiffel Towers, and about 28,387 London double-decker buses. Again, if you prefer thinking about these banknotes laid down next to each other, all in one direction, then we'd end up with a 54.9 million kilometer banknote conga line. This is enough to go to the moon and back 71 times, or around the world 1,370 times. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens if you split this equally among everyone, for all of the socialist utopians out there. This would amount to about $4,586.92 per comrade. The M2 measure is wider yet. As with M0 and M1, M2 includes physical money and instant access deposits at banks and other financial institutions, but is broadened even further to include accounts with accepted maturities of up to 2 years, as well as those with notice periods of up to 3 months. In effect, if you hold a bond with a bank that locks away your money for 18 months, it wouldn't be included in the M0 and M1 measures, but would be included in the M2 measure. M2 is the biggest step up yet, from 35.2 trillion at the M1 level to a whopping 95.7 trillion at M2. Again, if we converted this into $100 bills, it would weigh about 957 million kilograms. But Jack, how many Eiffel Towers and buses is this roughly equivalent to, I hear you ask? Well, luckily for you, we worked that one out as well. It's equivalent to about 131 Eiffel Towers, or about 77,177 London buses. Again, if we were to make this into a conga line of notes, then we'd reach about 149 million kilometers, which is enough to go to the moon and back 194 times, or go round the world 3,724 times. And if we were to split this equally among everyone, each and every comrade on Earth would receive about $12,470.68. M3 gets wider still though. It's everything included in M0, M1 and M2, as well as the likes of repurchase agreements, money market fund shares and debt securities with a maturity of up to 2 years. Without wanting this video to get too bogged down in technical details, the M3 money aggregate is a far less liquid measure, comprising of longer term assets, or assets which are far more difficult to turn into cash. Let's face it, at this point the numbers are starting to lose any of their meaning though. Nonetheless, the total is $110.53 trillion. Not a very big step up from M2, but then again, there isn't that much more included in M3 than M2. Again, if we converted this into $100 bills, it would weigh the same as 150 Eiffel Towers or 89,000 London buses, or reach about 117 million kilometers. This is enough to go to the moon and back about 223 times, or go round the world 4,281 times. Now finally, the bit you've all been waiting for. If we assume that this is the real measure of how much money there is in the world, and split it evenly amongst every single person, then we'd all get $14,334.12 each. Some financial institutions, including the UK's Bank of England, report M4 money aggregates, the broadest measures of all, including the likes of solid cash, deposits, and instruments with maturities of up to 5 years. But there isn't really a common definition of these higher level money aggregates. In fact, the only thing that's really agreed by everyone is the general principle that the higher up you go through the M's, the less liquid things included are. As such, there's no figure we can really give you about its value, as not everyone even agrees or understands what M4 money actually is. Ultimately then, the answer depends on your definition, meaning there's somewhere between 6.6 trillion and $110 trillion in the world, depending if you're more of a cash in hand or long-term savings kind of person. What do you think though? Let us know your thoughts about the definition and distribution of money down below. Also, if this topic interests you, then you should check out our similar video on global debt to find out who the world owes trillions of dollars to. Aliens? Anyway, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.